Who should have power? Well, to ask the answer seems obvious. Of course, the people should have the power to elect their leaders. But in the 16 and 1700s, this wasn't obvious at all. Most of Europe was ruled by kings who had absolute power, and the people could not question their king. But this tradition was soon going to change because people were starting to ask questions. Inspired by the thoughts of a new breed of philosophers with dangerous ideas. One of the worst countries in Europe at this time was France, and it wasn't by chance. But France spawned one of the bloodiest revolutions in history. The people of France was divided into three social classes which were called estates. The first estates were the clergy and the second estates were the nobility. These groups were given special rights and privileges, like tax reliefs and the best jobs. This despite the fact that the first and second estates only represented about 2% of the population. The third estate was a very diverse group, consisting of both rich merchants and poor laborers. Fated most of the useful tasks like growing food, industry and craftsmanship, and most importantly of all being soldiers. Even more from the pawn than the third estate, were the people who didn't belong to any estate. Most people in France back then belonged to this group, and most of them were extremely poor. Yet, they were the ones who paid most of the taxes, and they got nothing back from the government for doing so. The king's luxury and expensive army didn't leave much left for welfare. So why did these people put up with this system? Maybe it was because they were so used to it. Most people couldn't read or write, and so bringing in the new ideas as difficult, and since there was no freedom of speech, you would probably receive some jail time, if you weren't careful. But some still started to question the status quo. Old truths weren't so true anymore, and new liberal ideas were discussed in thousands of Rhenish homes. God was replaced with common sense, and some even called out for a new society to replace the old for revolution. Montesquieu was one of these voices. He said that the state's purpose was to secure the people's freedom. Therefore power should be divided between three bodies and not be wielded by a single man. Democracies still hold this principle, with different institutions checking and balancing each other. Another man with wild thoughts was Voltaire, who questioned the fact that people weren't allowed to speak their mind was unconstitutional. Because Voltaire was criticizing the rulers, and for that he was thrown in prison and banished from the country. His famous words, "I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it," are still even brought up today. A third philosopher with huge impact was Philosopher, who thought that all humans were born free and equal. The tragedy started the day someone fenced in a piece of land and claimed it for himself. That was the day man lost his freedom, with a saw thought that man should return to nature and that he should let an institution rule on his behalf. Since the king hadn't received his power from the people had the right to take it back. There weren't other philosophers during this age of enlightenment. And as you might imagine, the philosophers were both popular and dangerous. Their new ideas were soon to spark turbulence in Europe and the world, and shape what we have come to know the modern democracy.